On to New York now, where researchers who have found that the city is sinking under the weight of its buildings say developers still aren't taking the risk of rising water seriously enough.
The Big Apple ranks third in the world in terms of the value of real estate assets exposed to coastal flooding, after only Guangzhou and Miami. That could mean big losses for owners and investors. Gabrielle Fahmy has more in the second of a two-part series.
The island of Manhattan hasn't been spared from floods in recent years. Yet the same waterfront areas that bore the brunt of the devastation from Hurricane Sandy and recent flash floods have seen some of the highest rates of new housing developments. According to the research, some 90% of buildings at risk aren't up to flood standards. And because New York's got some of the most expensive land in the country, as rising seas erode the shore, it's one of the cities that stands to lose the most.
As we looked around the country, you're talking about a significant amount of money essentially lost to the rising seas in the New York area. If you project to 2050, it approaches $1 billion. Now, that's not retail value of land, that's tax assessed value, but it's that value that supports property taxes and, of course, supports all of the municipal services dependent on those.
There are features that help protect structures from floods. Mechanical water pumps are one of them. And though some developers have started building those in, especially the ones who rely on government financing as it's often a requirement, the majority still don't. The reason is simple. It's an added cost, and often the financial incentive just isn't there.
You know, these are businesses, right? So you try to minimize expenses, minimize risk. So just picking up extra costs just because usually doesn't go over that well. Like, why'd you spend extra money this year? Well, yeah, I felt it was a good thing, right? Can you charge more rent for it? Sometimes, but not always.
So build and hope for the best. That's why Delane says change has to start with government, or maybe even insurance policies or lenders.
I'll say this, seatbelts had to become a law before we all wore seatbelts, right? Although we all knew it saved lives, but like kind of everybody didn't necessarily do it. Now there's law, everybody does it.
And though New York has led the way in other aspects of green infrastructure, like regulation around buildings' carbon emissions,
our city has already taken major steps to becoming sustainable, resilient.
There are no laws around flood prevention, a gap experts say needs to be plugged, and soon.
I think it would be better to do it now versus kind of postponing everything, but with the caveat that not all the buildings can be rebuilt now.
One thing is for sure, she says, the intersection of climate and real estate is a burgeoning area of research. And many in the industry expect stricter regulations very soon, as New York looks for ways to protect the buildings that made it famous from the rising seas. Gabrielle Fahmy, CNA, New York.